Welcome to Emmanuel Fellowship Pastors Talk, where someone talks to one of our pastors. That's where we get the name. We just kind of sit and ask one of the pastors about a previous sermon. We've been off for a couple of weeks because of vacation and stuff, but I'm here with Chris Otterson, the worship director at Emmanuel Fellowship.
Hey, guys.
And we just wanted to talk about this last week's sermon out of Matthew 9. We were looking at the calling of Levi, or Matthew, the apostle, by Jesus. Before we talk about that, I wanted to give a quick second, Chris. So, Emmanuel, for the size church we are, we have a pretty good kind of tech ministry. We have live streams of our sermons and a podcast and like little short clips and videos and stuff that go out. But that has not been the case the last couple weeks. And I wanted to give a second for you to just kind of let people know a little bit about that bit and what's going on and the work you're doing behind the scenes on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, we just had a complete meltdown of the device that we use to do our live streaming. It's something that does a lot of different things. So it's a video switcher. It allows us to switch between cameras, to adjust audio, sends out all of that information out to YouTube. And on a Sunday morning a few weeks ago, it just crashed and burned. And I have spent some time trying to find out how to get it fixed and how to get it replaced. And I think that I have a solution. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where you have to send it out and you're kind of at their mercy in terms of how quickly they can get it fixed and get it back to you.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that goes quickly. But in the meantime, I'm doing the best I can with what I've got, which is basically a phone to live stream on Sunday mornings. But I am getting quality recordings through my laptop, and I'm trying to get those out as quickly as possible today. And that's a temporary solution just to get us along until we can get our good hardware back from the guy who fixes it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Chris. So the plan is to get back to all that stuff we've been trying to do. I feel like a lot of that stuff really blesses our people, and so we're heading back that direction. I want to give a second, man, because I feel like the blessing and curse of technology and ministry is that it's amazing until it isn't, and no one ever says anything until it stops working. And so, Chris, you've been working your tail off. Even before stuff broke, you work your tail off to serve our church with technology. But you've been working your tail off to get stuff fixed and back going. And so, thank you for that. That is it's a gift to our church, dude. I appreciate you.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was done.
I was just saying, thanks. It's something that I believe is really important because one who is not able to be with us to have a way to connect with us on Sunday morning. So it's a big priority for me.
Yeah. Okay, so this last Sunday, a lot of our guys were out. Craig was on vacation, Jim's on sabbatical, Jesse was there, but he was in vacation mode, and so it was mostly just me and you. And so, man, what were your thoughts? Anything stand out to you from Sunday? Anything you'd like to dig into a little bit?
Yeah, your point about being in the world and not of the world struck me. I'm always interested in stories where Jesus is meeting with people who are kind of on the outskirts of society, people that are either hated or just held at arm's length. And I wondered if there was any more that you felt like you didn't get to elaborate on, or if you had any other insights about this meeting that Jesus had with Matthew.
Yeah, man, what a great question. I think for a lot of us, these stories, this is the key one, right? Like Jesus calls Matthew, the tax collector, the traitor, to not just like be with him, but to be one of the apostles, right? Like that's a big deal. Like one of the 12, like he had authority. He was there. We didn't get into this piece at all, but like Matthew's testimony is insanely powerful in terms of how God used him to help build and spread the church on the other side of the cross. Church tradition and church history tells us that Matthew actually traveled to Africa and preached the gospel on the other side of the book of Acts, and was actually martyred in Ethiopia, preaching the gospel to royalty there. And so, like, man, you're talking about such a dramatic shift of a guy who has betrayed his people, is living in comfort and dishonest financial gain, and yet his life ends with him on a different continent preaching the gospel to people who are hostile to him. And by the way, the gospel takes root. Like, Ethiopia becomes such a core foundational place for the growth and health of the early church. It's such a, I don't know, it's just such a cool thing, right? But that all comes back to Jesus being willing to step in and hang out with a tax collector. And like you said, the person that everyone hates, that no one likes, right? Like, obviously Jesus had Jesus vision, and he knew who Matthew was and saw what God was going to do with him. But no one else in that space had that same vision for Matthew's life, right? Like, Matthew didn't have that same vision for his life. And yet look what God was able to do with that, like such a, I don't know. And I feel like it pushes us to think about who are the people that we just write off, that we just assume like they're not going to have something beneficial, or they're not going to have something important for the work of the kingdom. It's like such a, yeah. I mean, you get what I'm saying with that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I kind of take it in two directions. One, like, as followers of Jesus, we need seeking out those people and being in the world and not of the world.
Yeah.
At the same time, every single one of us is a Matthew.
Yes.
Like,
yeah,
we have all done the kind of things that are an affront to God, and yet God knows it and seeks us out.
Yeah. He's willing to reach out to Matthew. He's willing to reach out to you and to me. What a cool thing. Well, so one thing you mentioned to me before we started recording this, which I think is so cool, is this idea that, like, so Jesus does this. He reaches out to Matthew. He has this compassion on Matthew in his sin. He has this vision for what the kingdom can do in Matthew's life. And he reaches out to him with seemingly no regard to what that will cost him, right? Like, the religious leaders of the day, and even his own followers, we can assume, like, no one's happy with the choice to bring Matthew into the fold. And the Pharisees who are there present begin criticizing Jesus immediately, right? And yet he doesn't pause. He doesn't back down from that. He's just, this is important. This is what I'm doing. His line, right? It is not the healthy that need the doctor, but the sick. And so I'm here. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. This is where I'm at. This is the kind of ministry I'm doing. It really does, I think, raise a beautiful challenge for us as the church today to go, are you willing to put up with the critique, with the flack you will receive from going to the places Jesus goes, from calling to the people that Jesus calls? Like, thinking about the people who exist on the margins of our society, those who are in sex work, those who are struggling with addiction, those who've engaged in crime or are incarcerated, like those sorts of places, right? That the society tends to write off, that society tends to think lowly of. You will get residual hatred and dismissal for spending time in those contexts. And yet that's exactly what Jesus modeled to us, what it looks like to go and seek and save the lost.
Yeah. I mean, God's ways are not our ways. Jesus could have gone around looking for, the best and the brightest, most eloquent, or, wealthiest or most influential people. But he chose fishermen and a tax collector.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's even further encouraging and challenging to me is to remember in that moment, right? Like, Jesus is ministering to Matthew. He's calling Matthew out of this life of sin and into this new, beautiful calling he has for him. And remember, he frames it in this idea of compassionate love. It's the Bible verse that he challenges the Pharisees with, right? Is go and learn what God means by this. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Like, you should be having mercy on this guy the same way I am, right? But what I think is so cool about that scene is it shows that Jesus has compassion and mercy on Matthew in his sin as he's calling him into the fold. But he also has compassion and mercy on the Pharisees. He doesn't, flip them the bird and tell them to leave. He doesn't yell at them. He challenges them to grow in their faith. He says, go study this passage and figure out what it means. Like, he's calling Matthew out of his sin and calling him to a new life, and simultaneously calling the Pharisees out of their sin into a new life. Like, what compassion, It's just such a cool picture of what it means to love those in need of love, to be the doctor to the sick. I think, so the flip side of this, And maybe this is where we land our discussion. But I think the flip side of this that's really important, and that can be something we overlook in our cultural moment, is so yes, Jesus is going out amongst the sinners. He doesn't just meet Matthew at work and call him to the kingdom. He then goes to Matthew's house and goes to the party, right? He hangs out with all Matthew's coworkers and friends, all these people who are doing evil, detestable, oppressive things to their neighbors. Jesus goes and shares a meal with them. I think what's good and what's important for us to remember is that yes, Jesus goes and he hangs out with the sinners. But Jesus didn't go sign up to be a tax collector, right? He did not join in their oppressive, sinful work. He goes and he hangs out among them and he calls them to the kingdom. He tells Matthew, leave the tax booth and come to me. And so, yes, he is going to those whose society has forgotten. He's going to those who are deep down the rabbit hole of some really atrocious sin, right? But he doesn't lower down to their level. He steps into the mud to grab their hand and pull them out and call them up. And I think that's something we can easily forget, right? Like we live in a moment as the church where missionality is kind of trendy. We're all the missionary. We need to go and preach the gospel to those who need it. But man, right? Like it's a very easy thing to step into the world and be drawn down to the level of the sinful world versus stepping into the world and calling sinners up to what Christ has for them. And I think there's a caution there for us, right? Because we're not Jesus. We're not perfect. We're not God. We're sinners saved by grace. And so, yes, we endure the scorn, we endure the ridicule, we go to the sinner, but we don't do so that we can wallow in sin with them.
Right.
We do so that we can call them to something higher,
Amen. Yeah, I mean, what I'm reminded of just speaking, how Jesus meets him where he's at.
Yes.
He just show up and say, hey, come over here and follow me. He goes to his house and shares a meal, which from your message, we know that was like a way of saying, like, you're accepted. Like, it shows a level of love just to even be able to break bread with. That was radical. Was not something that was tolerated back then.
Yeah, it's loving, it's dignifying, and it's simultaneously challenging. I mean, I think there's some really cool application for us as a church, right? How we think about how we're going to live that out practically. Who are the people in your life whose society has written off? Who are the sick who need the gospel in your life? Even the people that it's going to cost you something to spend time with them. And what does it look like to go to that person offering them love and compassion and dignity while simultaneously actually calling them to something new? That's a hard balance to walk, but it's just one that at the end of the day, Jesus has just modeled that really well for us. And so we get to copy off the teacher.
Yeah.
We get to try and repeat what dad has done, and do it in our own way. What a cool thing.
Yeah, man. I feel really convicted, in a good way, not like I'm so terrible, but like, he set a high bar and it's beautiful and it's just, it inspires me.
Yeah. Same, dude. Same. Any other thoughts?
Those were my big ones. Unless there's something else that you felt like I missed.
No, dude, I think it was a good discussion, man. I appreciate you taking the time to do it with me.
Oh, I'm happy to.
Rock and roll. Well, guys, thanks for hanging out. Lord willing, we'll be back in the Word this coming Sunday and get to talk about it again next week.
See you guys.
Later, man. Thanks for your time.